All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have us, my guest today, Mary Beth O'Connor. Mary Beth, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So Mary Beth has been sober since 1994. She's also been in recovery from abuse, trauma, and anxiety. 6 years into recovery, Mary Beth attended Berkeley Law. She worked at a large firm, litigated class actions for the federal government. In 2014, she was appointed a federal administrative law judge, which position she held until 2020. Mary Beth is now a director, secretary, and founding investor for She Recovers Foundation and a director for LifeRing Secular Recovery. She regularly speaks about multiple paths to recovery to groups such as Women for Sobriety. In her op-ed titled I Beat Addiction Without God, she described combining areas from several secular programs to create a robust recovery foundation, appeared in the Wall Street Journal. Her new book, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is out. Well, that certainly has a ring to it, doesn't it? Junkie to Judge. Mary Beth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Pretty crazy. I mean, inspiring. We're going to get into this, but all right, before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are now.
Yeah, I'm originally from central New Jersey, and I came out to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, to go to Berkeley, and I just never left. So I'm still here.
Okay. So what the heck happened?
You know, I say things really started bad from the beginning. My mother was an unwed mother in 1961, Irish Catholic. This was a big deal. And so when she had me, she actually couldn't bring me home. I was left with the nuns for 6 months. And then she visited, I'm sure, but she didn't see me that much. And when she married who became my sister's father, I moved in with her, but she separated from him when I was 6, lived with my great grandmother for 3 years. And then she married my stepfather when I was 9, who was really violent to both of us. So it was sort of a lack of connection with my mom, no real sense that she was sort of paying any attention to me or connected to me. And so when things got even worse, I was really on my own to handle it.
What age are we talking about at this point?
She married my stepfather when I was 9. And so that's when things really escalated. My mother could be violent, but you never feared for your life. With my stepfather, you really never knew how far things might go. And he was also sexually violent with me, and it was a situation where you never knew what might happen. It wasn't like it was every day. It was that it was unpredictable. And I developed techniques to try to reduce the frequency. Like if he was sleeping, I would put one dish away at a time out of the dishwasher when I was doing my chores, a lot of things like that to try to control the situation the best I could. But ultimately, it was out of my control because it was really about him and not about me. So there was just a lot of stress and strain.
That's at 9 years of age.
Yes.
So how did things unfold?
So I pick up drugs at 12. That seemed like a good idea at the time. I started using alcohol when I was 12. I moved on to pot, pills. I did a lot of acid. And when I was 16, I found what became my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine. And I started shooting up at 17. And I was in full bore addiction when I graduated high school. It's in my book, I include what led up to that, the trauma side and the lack of bonding with my mother, because it wasn't out of the blue. So
of course, yeah.
It was positive. In the beginning, it seemed to provide relief and happiness and connection to my friends and just a more lighthearted Mary Beth than I had experienced. It's just that it turned on me, very quickly. So there was a reason, but in the long run, my substance use disorder became my number one problem for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just say, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing this. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, to go through that is friggin' horrific. And we'll get to how the heck you turn all this around. But at what point did you say, I need some help?
When I was in college and I did better, and I emphasize better with my drugs the first several years of college, I did at times try to go to like where the students were being trained to be therapists. They had like a free counseling center. I tried a couple times, but I wasn't really able to connect with what was going on. And so instead I developed self-harm behaviors. Like I would cut. I would buy beer in bottles on purpose so that when I got drunk, I could break the glass and cut. I also had, I know this sounds like a litany of horrors, but I had a really bad multi-assailant rape in college, which made me revisit an earlier event. And then I moved in with a violent boyfriend. And so it just escalated. And I started using meth again in January of my senior year. And I used for another 10 years. I didn't go to rehab until I was 32 years old.
Oh my God. Now, when you sought out help, it was under the auspices of what?
It was related to the rapes. I think that was part of it, that I knew that had an impact on me. I knew I had been abused as a child, and I would talk about that. I didn't see the part related to my mother. I just saw the part related to my stepfather and that violence. So I would talk about those things a bit, but I really wasn't able to connect to my feelings. So I wasn't making real progress. Even when I was using for those 10 years from senior year of college to 32, I tried therapy several times. But the reality was I just couldn't connect to what was going on. And I didn't have clarity about my own thoughts because I was using drugs. And there was like a wall between me and the ability to heal.
Were the therapists you had, were there any therapists who were able to be insightful enough to see what was going on or what had transpired?
I usually didn't. I would say maybe that I was using drugs, but not the extent of it. So there was that sort of false covering and, sort of limiting their ability to really address the real problem until the end. When my husband and I were in couples counseling, he told the therapist how bad my drug use was. And I actually went to a psychiatrist at that time to try to see what could happen. He said he was an addiction specialist, but he really wasn't. And he told me I was depressed. And if I took the proper dose of antidepressants, I would just naturally stop using speed, which isn't what happened at all. And so those were some of my initial efforts.
So at what point did you, quote unquote, get a foothold and become, quote unquote, successful in begin the healing process?
So when I went into rehab, and this is in 93, 94, and I did get sober. I mean, I used 3 times in the first 5 months, and then that was it. I didn't use again. And so now I'm 32 years old. It's January of 94. And so I made a lot of serious, robust efforts around my sobriety, but I did also start, as soon as I got home from rehab, go into individual therapy with somebody who had addiction and trauma expertise. And I went to couples counseling with my husband. And so that was really the beginning of starting to understand the severity of what had happened to me, to even find out that I had PTSD, which I didn't know that I had, to understand that my catastrophic thinking, my constantly waiting for something to go wrong and my world to explode, my spinning brain about every little mistake I thought I made, that was all anxiety and PTSD related, was news to me. Mm-hmm. And so it was really, that was the beginning of the process when I really got someone who had when I was sober and I had someone who had expertise in trauma, is when I really started to make forward progress and start to heal. But it was a long, process. I did individual.
It sounds incredibly long. And I'm sitting here looking at you thinking, seriously, how do you survive decades of drug use? My God, what testament to your guts and your heart. How do you get to the point where I want to go to law school?
Well, that's all my stories tend to be complicated. So I actually went to law school right out of college, and Berkeley Law. But remember, I started using meth again in January of my senior year, and so I was unable to do it. My addiction was full bore again, and I was missing weeks of class at a time.
Wow.
So I knew I was going to fail, so I withdrew. So that was this real sort of agony underneath, that I had been accepted to a top 10 law school, and I knew I lost it because of my substance use disorder. I mean, driving by that building was just pain, it was horrible. And so when I got sober, first of all, I was 32 and I had a really bad work history because of my addiction. I couldn't hold a job. And I was, as I said, working my way down the corporate ladder. Every job was less money, less responsibility. I held it for less time. So when I got sober, I really had to be realistic about what job I was ready for. I mean, I had a Berkeley degree and good grades, but I was not ready for the job that on paper that would have qualified me for. So I started realistic. I started part-time, temporary, low-level admin job when I got home from rehab. And I worked my way up into more professional, higher level professional jobs. And my last job before law school, I was a customer service manager at a mid-sized company. But law school, which I had lost, was always kind of, in the back of my mind. But I was really afraid to try again. I was afraid of the rejection. I was afraid of trying to have to explain myself, what had happened. And so it was, it took me a while to get the courage up, and also to really have enough clarity to know that that's what I wanted, that I really did. And by now I'm 39, and I sort of felt like, well, I either try now or I just admit I'm never going to do it, And so that's why I ended up applying again. And Berkeley didn't take me back at first. They didn't. And I ended up at another school in San Francisco, Hastings, which is good, but not top 10. But then I was third in my class out of 400, and Berkeley took me back, and I did end up graduating from there. So that was a real pride to give back something so important that I had lost.
How did the book come about?
So when I was appointed a judge, and that was in 2014, it was really a time of reflection. As you say, how did I do this? How did I go from that teenage IV meth addict, abused child, abuse that went on into my 20s, and work my way to this position? And so I really started reflecting on my story again, on my history, and on what it was really like and what had really happened, but also looking at it sort of with more adult eyes again about some of the positive things I had done, and about how I had taken a lot of steps to recover, all the efforts and all the work that I had put in. And sometimes I was given wrong advice, and I was strong enough to reject that wrong advice and do what I knew was right for me. And so it was really just looking at that whole arc, and then thinking that my story is unusual enough that maybe I can get it to capture attention, and then talk about multiple paths to recovery, because my recovery is not AA 12-step recovery, it's secular. And I don't feel that enough people know that that's an option for them. And so I thought my story could capture opportunities to speak about multiple paths and and also the trauma substance use disorder connection, which I think people underappreciate.
Just reach for a pad of paper here. So first off, you mentioned your husband. So at what point did you get married?
So my husband and I got together when I was in college, and I lived like an hour away, and he thought I was like a weekend drug user. And believe me, I encouraged that belief system in him. But we moved in together, and he realized how bad it was. And so when I went into rehab, one of the factors, and I emphasize just one, was that he was really sort of done with me. He was ready to throw me out. But when I got home, he decided to give me a chance. And so, he watched me stay sober, do my therapy, and we did a lot of couples counseling as well. And then we got married when I had 3 years sober.
Kids?
No.
Okay. So multiple paths to recovery, obviously, the 12-step paradigm is pretty well known. Why didn't you choose that? I mean, aside from the fact that, you're not religious, does one have to believe in God to go down that path?
You have to have a higher power. And I
believe in a higher power.
Yeah. And I didn't believe in any higher power, but many people, look, first of all, I want to say I support 12 steps when it's the right fit for people. It's just not the right fit for everyone. And many people do not believe in the higher power, but it's also, there's an emphasis on that you're powerless. Whereas the secular options, the options I use, focus on self-empowerment. And so even people that have faith sometimes choose the other options for other reasons. Some people aren't comfortable with a sponsor relationship. Some people don't like the rigidity of the step process. So there's multiple reasons someone might choose the other options. But for me, the two biggest were the higher power and the mandate that I admit I'm powerless and turn over my will in my life. Those were things I wasn't going to do and wasn't really able to do.
Interesting. I want to kind of look at that a little more. What do you see as the benefits, or what could you potentially see as the benefits of someone saying, yes, I'm powerless, I'm giving this over to someone or something else?
Well, if you believe in a higher power, I think for some people there's a reassurance, right? That something is on your side and taking care of you. And so for some people, that gives them comfort and sort of releases stress or strain. And so for some, it's beneficial. But for others, I mean, there's benefits to the self-empowerment approach. And what I really did was I took control of my recovery, and I found the options, and I went to the meetings. I did a lot of 12-step meetings too, but I read all the materials of the primary options. And today, like LifeRing Secular Recovery, which I'm on the board for, is a good option. She recovers, and there are others. And I went to all their meetings, and I just pulled the ideas from all of them that I thought would benefit me, that I thought would help me build a strong recovery foundation. And it was a little scary because I'm looking at 20 years behind me of bad decision making, right? But on the other hand, I really felt like what they were offering me in the 12 steps wasn't going to work. And so I decided to make the efforts to try to find a path I thought would be better. And in the long run, it built up my confidence and my competence, right? That I could really guide myself forward. Not that I made perfect decisions, because no matter what program you pick, you're not going to do that. But that overall, I was doing the analysis about what the different ideas were, or what the choices were, and then deciding what was for me and implementing it. And then it's sort of like in the other areas of life, right? You do the research, you set a goal, you figure out a plan how to attain that goal. I mean, that trained me to really tackle every other area of my life. So in the long run, I think it was beneficial.
I know it's incredible, Mary Beth, to look at you and hear your story. And, you described years of abuse and drug use and choices that, I mean, how could they be beneficial? But how do you go through all of that, or how did you go through all of that and begin to build up that confidence? Because we're not just talking about last week I made a bad choice, I got to get over it, right? I mean, this is the years.
Yes, but it was really about the step by step. I mean, for me, it was really about focusing on the right next choice, right? What's the next thing I need to do? Like professionally, what's the first job? What's the right job for me? And then what should my recovery program look like? That's an important initial choice. And I decided individual therapy with this trauma expert, couples. And then I did a meeting every day. The other 5 days, I did one of my different programs meetings. So 7 days a week, I had something going on in the evening. So it was really thinking about what sort of plan should I have? And then professionally, similarly, in my relationship with my husband, I mean, it's not a light switch. It was years of trying to learn how to listen to each other and for both of us to release our frustration and anger. The other factor for me was that because of the PTSD and anxiety, even when I was doing the right next thing, I wasn't really able to enjoy it or feel as proud as I should have, because I was always hyper worried about tomorrow and what might go wrong tomorrow and what mistake I might make tomorrow. So even when I was doing the right thing, it took me a long time to really be able to emotionally experience the sort of the pride of accomplishment that I really deserved for my efforts.
The other element you talked about was the connection between trauma, abuse, and addiction. Speak to that.
I mean, if you have a trauma history or, a high adverse childhood experiences score, and my score is 8, that's sort of a shorthand way to figure out your risk, but your risk of developing a substance use disorder is much higher. I think it's 3 to 4 times higher. And certainly the data shows that at least 75 to 80% of people with a substance use disorder have trauma histories of one kind or another. And the more you have multiple events like I did, the higher your risk. And so, there's one event that's not good, but there's also in a house where there's constant stress, but then I had that, but then I also had multiple discrete events, even separate from the household. And so all of those things increased my risk. And also not having anyone on my side, no adult I could turn to, no adult I felt connected to, no real supportive relationship. I always knew that I was on my own, and that creates an additional vulnerability to seek something out that's going to help relieve all that pressure.
So let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Mary Beth O'Connor. The book is called From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. When was the point where you said, I'm going to write this book? And for whom is this book?
I will say, for one thing, 30% of my book is recovery. And part of that is because I feel like a lot of memoirs go, well, I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. And that's not how recovery works. And so I go through the first 3 years of my recovery, which I think was particularly important because I was doing the trauma recovery as well as the substance recovery, but also because I did it the secular way, a way that's not as common. But I really thought with the book about the people that are struggling, but also the families. I mean, in a way, the Junkie to Judge I chose on purpose to sort of show the arc that no matter how deep in your pain you're living, no matter how bad your life is, with recovery, your future could be pretty much anything. And I do try to reassure those who don't have hope that they can recover, that they can, because I did. And, I don't think I'm that special in a lot of ways, but also to the families, that if their family member is struggling, don't give up hope. Let's keep trying to help them find a path forward. Let's keep trying to reach out. Don't write someone off because they're shooting up meth. They still have the possibility of developing a productive and happy life, and we should do what we can to help them reach that.
When people come up to you and say, how the heck did you do this? I mean, before I go here, I want to ask you a question. Can you recall a particular time with a particular therapist that resonated with you?
So I did the individual and for like 3 years, and that was helpful. But I'll tell you, one of the most helpful things, and also I did meds for 3 years, but one of the most helpful things was I went into group therapy for a group of women with trauma histories. And that was a whole nother level of understanding for me. When these women would talk, I knew about the high level events, the high level traumas, the high level reactions, but they would talk about sort of what I viewed as just Mary Beth personality traits or Mary Beth behaviors. And they were tying it back to their trauma. And it made me realize that a lot of what I was doing, like the hypervigilance and the anxiety about tomorrow, that it was all a trauma reaction. It wasn't who I was inherently. It wasn't, Mary Beth at her core, which sort of made me able to view it as something that could be fixed, that it was possible to fix it. And the other incident I really remember.
And let me just, if I may interject,
Sure.
That's major. That's a major realization. And to be able to act on that, of course, is something else. But I just appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, it was a big deal for me. I hadn't realized it. I just thought it was me, and that's who I was because it was so old. I mean, the truth is that the trauma recovery took many more years than my substance recovery, many more years. It was deeper, it was older, and it was more complicated in a way. I mean, within 2.5, 3 years, I've never struggled with my substances after that. But trauma therapy, it took much longer. And even now, I say I'm mostly recovered. Because I still do struggle a bit with anxiety, but it's much less often, much less intense, and it doesn't last as long. So it's still there, but it's much, much, much better. But it was a process. And I say it took a long time, but it's, again, not a light switch. It's gradual improvement, right? Gradual improvement, month by month, year by year, until you get to a place like you feel, I'm probably as recovered as I'm going to get at this point. Maybe I can do a little bit of improvement, but this is probably about where I'm going to stick at this point.
Wow. Sounds amazing. I want to thank you so much for being here. You are so friggin' inspiring. It's ridiculous. I mean, and I don't say that lightly, really. Come on. Really. It's amazing. And I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your personal story. It's not easy to do. So what are you doing now with your life?
So the book is out. And so I do a lot of speaking around that. I'm on the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery. I'm on the board for She Recovers Foundation. And for your listeners, She Recovers isn't just for recovery from substance use disorder. It's also trauma recovery, mental health, other behavioral disorders, all in one place. Because most of us with a substance use disorder have these other things at the same time.
Right.
But also I do a lot of speaking. I do conferences and podcasts and things like that to just try to increase awareness, particularly around multiple paths to recovery.
Okay. And what is the best place for people to get in contact with you, Mary Beth?
So my Twitter is @MaryBethO_, and my website is junkietojudge.com. And then my book is available on Amazon and all the usual sites. And you can message me through my website and I will answer every message. I do answer every message I get.
Okay. I appreciate it. Wow. Love to have you back at a later date to continue on with this conversation. You're incredible. Really appreciate you coming on here. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.